A very warm welcome to St Peter Mancroft Church at 1 o'clock on Wednesday here in Norwich. I'm Edward Carter, the vicar here, and a welcome to those of you who are here in the church itself while we're open, but also a welcome to any who are watching on YouTube as we live stream a short reflection, which we do every Wednesday at this time. Thank you for joining us today. Well, I've been playing quite a bit of chess recently, which I haven't done for many years, but I've just started again with one of my sons, Matthew. And our interest was partly piqued by a very good Netflix series that was aired recently called The Queen's Gambit. And we very much enjoyed watching that and decided, wouldn't it be fun to try a bit of chess? We also became very interested in the way in which computers and artificial intelligence has started being used in the playing of chess, and the way in which computers actually can take on very skilled grandmaster type chess players and even defeat them. My son Matthew is very interested in that kind of thing, and that was part of why we started playing chess together as well. And I was more attracted, I suppose, by the elegance and the simplicity, but also the depth of the game of chess. It's a great strategy game, as perhaps you know, and indeed maybe you enjoy playing chess yourself. I love my games, and chess is certainly one of them that I do like very much indeed. Well, you've got to picture me with my son Matthew hunched over the chessboard, and I have to own up to the fact that I normally lose. Just occasionally, and in fact, I think last week I managed to beat him once. He was slightly disgruntled, I have to say, but normally he will win a safe victory because he's very skilled at playing chess. But the other day, partly because he's so much better than me, he had an idea, and that's really what I wanted to share with you today. He had this idea that he could play chess blind, i.e. Not looking at the board while it was set out. And I, as his opponent, would be allowed to see the board, and I would make my moves in full knowledge, and he would, what he did was just lie on the floor with a blanket kind of covering himself completely, and he would call out the move he wanted to make. So I want to move my pawn forwards to, and there's a grid reference you can use from A to H and 1 to 8. So every square on a chessboard has a reference number from A1 all the way through to H8. So he made his moves without actually looking at the board at all. He just called out, as I say, the move he wanted to make. Because, of course, in chess, there isn't any hidden information. Everything is there on the board. Everyone knows what's going on, and normally two people would be looking at the board and making their moves. What Matthew was having to do was imagine and remember what the board was, what the state of play was, and then making his moves in response to mine, which I described to him, but which he couldn't actually see. Well, he did amazingly well, although I did in the end defeat him because he got one or two things slightly out of place. But he did amazingly well to visualize the game as it proceeded and ran the game to a very close conclusion. Anyway, a few days later on, the two of us happened to be in the car driving out somewhere, and he said, oh, well, we could do it the other way around, because he had a game of chess up on his phone and with the board and all the pieces just on the phone. And he said, well, don't put a blanket over your head, Dad. Don't shut your eyes because you're driving, but concentrate on your driving, but also play the game of chess with me. I'll have the board, I'll make my moves, I'll describe to you my moves, and you just have to tell me what you're going to do and keep that picture of the game of chess in your head while you're driving. So exactly the same in reverse. Well, I knew it wouldn't go particularly well, but I gave it a go, and actually I did better than I was expecting. I certainly lost. The whole thing fell apart fairly quickly. But I managed to visualize in my head the game, this chess game, as it was unfolding, and made a number of fairly decent moves, I suppose. Of course, the next step on, which we haven't tried yet, is that if both players are good enough and both players can accurately remember what the state of the board is and what's happening in the game, you don't actually need a physical board at all. You don't need any of the pieces. You can just say, right, we've set out the board in kind of, in our heads. We know where all the pieces are. And then the first player would say, well, I'm going to move my pawn, such and such a move. And the other player said, oh yes, that's good, I'll move this. And you just both visualise the whole game in your heads, perhaps as you were walking along together. As I say, we haven't managed to do that yet, and I'm not sure I would ever manage to do that at all, because things might get kind of lost in the memory, and we might fall out over where exactly that particular queen had moved to. In fact, all of this reminds me, and perhaps you can kind of think about how this might be true. This reminds me that to do well at chess, of course you need to have the technical ability to know how the pieces move, but you need, above all else, to visualize what's going on, to kind of imagine what's happening in the game so that you can think ahead. And the very, very top players, of which I'm certainly not one, very top players are technically strong, yes, but what really marks them out is that they are imaginative. They play imaginatively, having a strong visual sense in their heads of what's happening and how things might develop as well. And as I reflected on all this, and being a vicar, that's sort of occupational hazard really of being a vicar. You reflect on all these things in the light of God and of faith. And I suppose I made a sort of link to a more general way in which I see the world. Yes, you do need to have those, what I've called technical abilities, certain abilities to do things in the world. I mean, just simply some of the very bodily things we do, walking around and things like that, but also perhaps the work we have or the way in which we live our lives alongside others, supporting and helping them. All of those relationships, yes, we need to be able to do that, and that's part of the joy of life, of course. But also, very importantly, we must be imaginative about seeing the world and seeing the world's future as well. And that links to the great things such as hope and faith and trust, all those things which are very hard to pin down and describe, but actually are very, very important indeed. They're all about that imaginative seeing what's going on. And for me, as a Christian person, and of course I don't know exactly where you stand with God or whether you have a faith at all, but for me as a Christian, that's where my own faith actually kicks in really significantly and is so important. Often people think, when they talk to me, they say, oh, you're a Christian, Edward. What does that mean? Is it like a straitjacket? Is it like a set of rules that really constricts you and ties you down? And for me, no, not at all. That's not at all what my Christian faith is. Of course, there's a sense of guidance and a good way of living. I certainly don't want to doubt that. But for me, my faith is much more about a kind of imaginative framework that helps me see and visualize the world in a new way. And in fact, see and visualize it more clearly as God sees it, is how I would describe it. And seeing God's presence within it and God's purposes within the world as they unfold, as things happen in the world and around us. So my faith, for me, isn't a straitjacket at all. It's the opposite. It sort of sets me free to see things much more clearly and in an exciting way, an imaginative way. And I think probably that's really important for us just at the moment, the way the world has been this last year. We've had an awful lot of straitjacket stuff. And what we really need is that sense of imagination again and excitement about seeing the world again fresh, the world around us, this city of Norwich, our own neighbourhoods, wherever we might be, seeing them again in a way that will set us free, I would say, to resonate with God's purposes for us again. Of course, for Christians, earlier this month we celebrated Easter Day, which is one of the great festivals in the Christian year. And this season that we're still in, Christian people, church people, call Eastertide. It kind of runs on for a number of weeks after Easter Day itself. And of course, at the heart of Easter Day is the most crazy proposition that's ever made. Somebody, Jesus, raised from the dead. We know in normal terms that that's just not possible. We know that people do not rise from the dead. It just does not happen. But what Christians believe is that actually Jesus Christ did rise from the dead, and that this is a sign of God's guarantee and promise that the world he's made, the creation that we live in, is more than what we just first see and understand and know to be true day by day. God's promise is that there is more. There is more, kind of stacked above all that we normally see and experience. And what we see as we try to come to grips with this and embrace it and make it part of our life, what we begin to see, if we're imaginative about it as well, is a world and our lives full of blessings and hope and possibility and life. That's what Easter celebrates. Life under God. A new life, a new creation that God reveals in the risen Lord Jesus. Because you see, in many ways, often we as human beings are rather like my son Matthew, the chess player, with a blanket over our head. Often we don't really see much of what's going on. And we have to kind of get very skilled at doing what he was doing, which is beginning to understand and see more than what's apparent at first glance, which may be very limited. The world conspires to constrain our vision all too often. And what I believe the Christian faith can do is help us see properly again, see imaginatively again. Easter Day helps us see. In a way, Easter Day lifts that blanket away off us and lets us see again everything, reveals the full glory of God and of what life really is. So as I end, thank you again for joining me today for my reflection. Apologies if you don't like chess or games, but I hope that illustration has maybe helped a tiny bit. Maybe it's stirred something in you as you've reflected on your own life, the way in which you've experienced maybe this past year, which has really been very challenging in so many ways. And as I end, my prayer is for myself, but also for you, for everyone, that we together would be helped to see creatively, imaginatively, what God is doing. Not to accept that anything to do with God is a straitjacket constraining us, but it's the opposite. It sets us free to be the person that God really, really wants us to be. The real me, living life, I would say, with the risen Christ by my side. Amen.